So, Star Wars Jedi. Disney's, Lucasfilm's Star Wars Jedi's Fallen Order. So I just wanted to get all my thoughts out. I don't know what I'm going to call this thing. Probably that. But basically I wanted to say this. The narrative of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order it's failed by its ending. And the reason that it pisses me off is because it gets 90% of the way there and then dicks the landing for a stupid fucking reason. So, let's start from the very beginning. The point of the story and the very beginning of it tells you really early on, Cal Lightsaber has PTSD and is horrendously traumatized. It's the fucking first thing you see in the game. He's working on this junk planet. You know he's a Jedi. Order 66 happened. Okay, something happened. And he's got a lightsaber. Okay, something really happened. And then I forget that line, whatever it is, when he's talking to Trilla, and he says, whenever I try to use the Force, I'm back in that place. So, he has PTSD, and he's severely fucking traumatized. And if you pair together that, and you know what happens in Episode 3, Order 66, you know what's up. It's really obvious. Then you're dealing with Trilla, and Trilla basically keeps on goading him to reconnect with the Force because she doesn't trust herself, because she also has trauma. However, it's more about her guilt. I'm getting into that later. So, when you have these characters all hanging out in the Scooby-Doo mobile, and the game keeps on going into all the times where Cal is stuck in a situation where he has to reach inside of himself and remember his master's teaching, it gives you gameplay power, but the narrative is also basically saying, this is the moment where Cal finally really reaches into himself and introspects. It's where he thinks about what happened to him and is allowing himself to process it. It's allowing himself to go, it's okay to think about this thing that is horrifying and scary and puts you in, as he calls it, that place. So then that narrative is then pushed forward by the gameplay by giving you all these tools. And even before you know exactly what happened to Cal, even before you know, even before you see his master die, you know it was bad. And then you see it and it's really bad. He has to watch his master die and then hide himself out on a fucking junk planet, tearing up ships. And he was in the game, he's got to be his early 20s or late teens, him and Trilla. And you look at how old he is at the time, kid's barely in double digits. This is an early scar. So the game is all about trauma, and it's all about processing trauma and self-actualization through, basically therapy. He doesn't really go to therapy, but he has a community which is built out of a found family of all the people on the ship. And if that's the point, then it's okay, so how are we reinforcing that thread? Trilla comes into the picture. You already can kind of figure out where she is, but that's not really the point. It's not a reveal. This isn't fucking taking off the mask. It was you! Come on. If it's a fucking Jedi walking around in the time after Order 66, and they're wielding a red lightsaber and being an asshole, come on. So she's fucking she's Cere's old apprentice, and Cere betrayed her and sold her out to the Empire. Even before we know that, you can start to pick up what's going on. But that's not the point. The point is, okay, what do you do with that? What does Cere do with that? And the answer is, she feels immense guilt, and her path is then to basically say, I messed up and I fucked you over, and I have felt immense guilt and shame about that ever since it happened. Again, great. That's a good place to take it, because it reinforces the narrative that Cal is going through. You have to take personal responsibility. And you have to actually self-actualize and introspect and recognize what was done to you and what you did. Cal has to do that by getting over the fact that he did not kill his master. It was not his fault. And that's the moment where the game puts you on the path of getting your lightsaber broken, because Cal has to stop living in his master's shadow. He has to let go of his master and accept it wasn't my fault. And he can only do that after introspecting enough to accept the Force again and to be able to actually interact with it. Cere is in the same place as he was at the beginning of the game. They both shut themselves off from the Force. Cal was just forced to act, and then she was forced to act later. Again, all of that shit works so well. So then, as Cal finally has to rebuild his lightsaber, which is basically a metaphor for him piecing together who he is, he takes his old master and the teachings from Trilla, literally he takes her lightsaber and his, and makes them into one lightsaber that is his new one. He has to re-put himself back together based on his old teachings and his new teachings to become a new man and become a new person going forward. Perfect. Amazing. So then you have that, but then you have to get into what happens next. Like, it's not just about his self-actualization. I like Cal Lightsaber a lot. I think he's a great character. It's not just about his self-actualization, though. Like, what does it say in a grander sense? What does he do with that knowledge? You have to pay it forward. This is where Trilla comes in. Trilla spends the whole game glowering at you from the sidelines and making a big deal about everyone will betray you. She's Azula. She's Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Everyone will betray you. I fed up with this world, blah, 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 blah. And her whole point is you can never rely on people, only rely on yourself. But it seems really obvious early on with the black mascara and the eye makeup and like the stringy hair. She's not like really committed to this. This is not an ideology she's thought about and agrees with. She's just kind of cosplaying. And I kind of like it in the same way of Kylo. Kylo was trying to cosplay Darth Vader. So when you look at what Trilla does in the game, and what Trilla is doing is saying, I choose to put on this identity because I'm protecting myself. Because she can't handle the idea that things didn't happen for a reason. One of the lines she says in the final fight with Cal is, it made me strong. And it's like, that's a abused victim logic. Like, I'm not saying it's, that's what people tell themselves to get through the fucking day. She's never had anybody who stopped in to tell her, no, it didn't happen for a reason. Injustice is injustice. You were done dirty. You need to come to terms with that fact. So it turns into the way she protects herself. It's her armor, like literally her anger armor, just like Batman in fucking Dark Knight, where it's like you have to let go of your like monster armor and become the person that you're supposed to be inside, a human. And like, so that Trilla does that and actually opens up to Cal in the final moments, because Cal saw what she went through by using his Force Echo Sense on her lightsaber, and he's like, oh my god, like that's another good moment. He turns to Cere and says, I was wrong to judge you. I had no idea what you went through. I'm so sorry. Like, you went through hell and you did what you had to do. I'm so sorry. And like, you could joke that, oh, it's a little tumble or it's a little too much like in your feels, but like the game's about that. So it works really well. So when you take that and you put it up against the ending, the real question is, okay, you have all this great metaphor and you have this great narrative and it's going somewhere. So looking at it, the only way I can really see that game ending itself, that's my airbag light, I gotta get this thing replaced. The only way I can see it ending itself is by saying, okay, here's how I think this game should end. They should be locked in mortal struggle, and Cal talks her down. Kind of like the Crispy Boy fight, Darth whatever in KOTOR 2, I can't remember his name. I know Nihilus, I remember his other name, Darth Scion, I think. Kind of like Crispy Boy fight. You talk her down. You have this long talk, and you basically say, like, instead of, it wasn't worth it, was it? Instead, you basically tell her, like, I understand how you feel angry. I understand you feel like everyone betrayed you. They kind of did. It's okay. You don't have to be like that anymore. And then, like, reaching over and just taking the lightsaber out of her hands as she, like, shakes. And you might say, like, well, that's a little sexist, isn't it? Being like, oh, she's a scared girl inside. But also, Cal was a scared boy inside, but he got out. And Trilla didn't. So, yeah, he was a scared boy when he had to engage with the Force again. And he did it anyway for survival's sake, just like Trilla did. So it makes sense that she would be a scared little girl because she was a child. You see it through her eyes. Cere, if I remember correctly, like, looms over her. She's really tall. And then that tells you, like, Trilla was tiny. She was small. This is way too early for her to process any of this. So the ending, as I saw it, was Cal reaches over and just gently puts his hand on her and says, it's okay. You don't have to fight. And takes the weapon out of her hands, and she lets him. Because, again, this is all just cosplay. And the thing is, that's what happens. It's amazing. It's perfect. He basically just talks her down, and then once he cuts her lightsaber up, Cere comes in and says, I'm so sorry. I betrayed you, and I feel immense guilt and shame, and I can never make up for that. And it's fucking perfect. And then Vader comes in. And honestly, I'm going to be real, it feels like J.J. Abrams like broke into the office at the last minute and fixed the ending in his mind, because it's just like, it undoes everything. If the entire thrust of the narrative and the gameplay were locked together about introspection and self-analysis and being your best self and working on yourself with therapy and being who you're supposed to be inside is the narrative thrust of the game that reflects on the gameplay, And all of this stuff is peaking towards, you have to take what you've learned and push it forward to other people in your community and make sure that they really understand it. Then the end of the game is actually, no, none of that matters. Because eventually you're going to find somebody who doesn't introspect, who's just stronger than you, and then nothing means anything. You should never have introspected in the first place. Like, again, Trilla resists the dark side, or not Trilla, Cere resists the dark side in that last minute, but for what? Like, so they can run away because Vader's too strong? Like, again, it feels like J.J. Abrams. It feels like fan service. It's cool that they put you in the boss fight and have him go like, okay, fight him, and then Vader immediately chokes you and throws you across the room. That's cool, but also, it comes right after he fucking cuts Trilla in half because people can't get redeemed, I guess, and live through it? And I mean, it does remind me a lot of Kylo, and hey, if you thought this wasn't going to be a Reylo complaint, haha, you lose. It does feel like a Reylo thing where it's just like, no, Kylo killed too many people, he has to die. And it's like, does he? Trilla did bad things, but does she have to die? And again, it feels, I've mentioned this before on my Twitter, but it feels like the Hays Code just, we can never get away from it. Like, especially when it comes to Disney. Bad people must be punished, and crime can never be rewarded. In the end, you must die for what you have done. And it's like, but the entire game, the whole thrust of the narrative is saying, this is about coming to terms with what was done to you. It's about trauma. It's about PTSD, and it's about working on yourself. And you will eventually be rewarded by working on yourself because that's the end point. Like, that is an optimistic thing to tell people, and God bless it for that. And then in the final 10 seconds, it says, no, none of that matters. None of this matters. It doesn't matter at all. We just have to make it feel climactic. We have to do the fan service. Therefore, either don't worry about the narrative or nothing means anything. Like, there's no way to look at the game as it presents its story and its narrative other than giving you power through what you have introspected and through Cal's personal journey and Trilla's and Cere's of trying to come to terms with what was done to you and your participation in it and how much you should blame yourself for what happened, only to immediately at the last minute say, and then none of it matters. Not only does Trilla die because she's done too much wrong, but also you have no power. You don't. The end. There's nothing else. There is only death because you can never overcome what was done to you, and there will always be someone stronger than you to punish you for what you've done because you deserve it. And that's Jedi Fallen Order.